Kara Shalom, welcome to Heinrich Edgecome Art. We are going to paint these beautiful cornflowers today, and we are going to do it in a little bit different way from the traditional. We are going to start with the flowers and then paint the sky and then the middle ground. In that way, your sky will have a lot of depth, the middle ground will be a bit fuzzy, and then your cornflowers will pop beautifully. The flowers are going to take a lot of layering, so have a little patience there. The original photo for this is from Pixabay, and we'll show it to you now. There we go. And you can see that the background is quite fuzzy because the flowers are the focal point. The materials used are listed in the description below, and make sure you have gouache if you have, and also an Eradicator brush. Now you can make any kind of sketch that you like. A rough sketch is quite good enough. It's just to give you some guideline as to where you would want to put your flowers. Now if you look at the color mixes that we have here, Heinrich started there with a green, and that green is a very interesting color, and it's made from the Pthalo blue yellow shade together with Imidazilone yellow. And it's quite a bright green. So if you want to make it more yellowy, you just add yellow. And if you want to make it a bit darker, you just add a little bit more of the Pthalo blue. Right through, you will see that you can add almost any of the colors on your palette to the flowers and the buds, because these colors will complement each other, mix into each other, and create a lot of interesting shades that will give your flowers just that little bit of an extra zing. It is best to use a brush with a very fine point, because you are going to work very finely with the colors and dab them in little by little. There are no large brush strokes here. Everything is literally just dabbed in, and then you can allow the paint to do its own thing. Now if you find that your paint is flowing too much, or that your colors are kind of infringing upon each other, then you can just dab it out. That's one of the lovely things of watercolor. Many people say if you make a mistake, then that's it, but sometimes you can get happy accidents. So don't be afraid to add your colors and to dab it out if you don't like what you've got. Here we also add a little bit of the Quinacridone Magenta, and later on you will see that we cover it. And you would think, well, what's the point? Why did you add the magenta if you are going to paint over it? Well, that little bit of red that is underneath your purple layer or underneath your yellow or your green layer just gives it a little bit more interest, makes it a little bit more natural. There's nothing in nature that is really just one color. If you look at anything in nature, it is made up of so many shades, so many tones. So use your imagination and add your colors as you wish. You can see here Heinrich would make strokes of green, strokes of yellow, strokes of blue, and all of those work together to make your stalks and your flowers. And with watercolor, you go through these ugly stages, and then you think, oh, this is a mess. I am never going to get this right. And then the next moment, it just comes together. So the splattering there is also needed, because you need to have a little bit of texture, and it will probably get moved around a little bit later on, but use it. Use what you've got and allow it to help you to create the texture. Now, cornflowers are kind of purplish, so why are we starting with the blue? Because we want to give it depth. So you can start with the horizon blue together with the phthalo blue. You can use the mixture of the two, and then for the shades, the shadows and the darker parts, you add dioxazine. And as you can see, he works very, very lightly with a fine-tipped brush. And he works the colors into each other. Everything is still basically wet. So allow the colors to fuse, to mix. And if you want to, and you're not happy with what you've got, wet your brush and just lift the colors out again. You can fix some of your mistakes, and don't always see it as a mistake. See it as a, wow, this is something new. Many times when you paint, you would think that, oh, this is just not going to do the trick. And then suddenly, out of the blue, everything just comes together. So here, the cornflowers are very wispy, stringy kind of. The leaves are thin, so you can literally just make little strokes to start the cornflowers. Now, like I said, this is going to be a lot of layering, so have a bit of patience. So once you've done your first layer, let it dry a little bit. So once it's dry, you must wet the whole background. Now, like I said, we are using Pthalo blue. Pthalo blue is a staining color. And as you can see, we're wetting the page and the Pthalo blue is going nowhere. When you have non-staining colors and you wet it like that, like you can see there in the middle, then the paint would actually flow and it might cause a mess. So now my sky area, everything is wet. And we use the horizon blue and some of the phthalo to fill in the spaces between the flowers. Now, because the flowers have blue in it, it doesn't matter if the sky color fuses into it a little bit. The colors will just work together. If you want a uniform background, you have to use broad strokes from left to right or right to left. But because we want to have a background that is more interesting, we dab the colors in randomly and allow it to do its own thing. Now your paper might bubble a little bit, and in this case, it is okay if it pools because you are going to tilt it a little bit later on to help the paint spread. In the foreground, we can add any of the colors on the palette. You have a cornfield there, and the cornfield, again, is not one uniform color. There's greens, there's browns, there's blues. If you look at it, there's a lot of darkness, there's a lot of light. So use the colors on your palette. Now you can tilt it, and as you can see there, the paper did make a pool on the right-hand side, and as you tilt it, the paint spreads. And at the end, you will see it actually, in this case, made a beautiful, wispy, cloudy effect. Now, that's again a happy accident. You won't always get that, but sometimes it does happen. So the background has been painted now, and again, you've let it dry. Now you can use some of the green mix, add some Quin Magenta, and there you have a beautiful mauve, purple, brown color, which you can use to make your shade or your shadows. Again, add some of the darker blue. This brush that Heinrich is using has an extremely fine tip. It's the Silver Black Velvet, one of our favorite brushes. This brush is just amazing to work with. So he uses the tip of this brush and the phthalo blue, the dioxazine, and some of the mauve to create the next layer of shadows in the flowers. Now you will follow the same kind of principle with all the different flowers. So the more green you add, the greener the shadow would be. The more dioxazine you add, the darker or blacker, if I can call that, the blacker your shadows would be. So play around with your mixture there in the middle and see what you can put together. Don't be afraid to mix your colors. People are always talking about muddy colors and so on. And yes, you do get colors that look, this is a bit dodgy. But if your colors are used in harmony, like we are doing here, then they will work together. Mix them. If you want to test it on a side paper before you use it on your painting, do that. But don't be afraid. Watercolor is actually also all about experimenting and making things interesting. And using your brush to shape your flowers, your background, your stalks. And you can see there, Heinrich is basically adding almost everything from his palette into that middle pool. And the beautiful shades that you get there can really add interest to your flowers and to your elements on your painting. So it's not only just for this painting, but any other painting that you have. If you want to experiment a little bit, just take your paints and mix them. See what you get. Sometimes it's a really surprising color. Other times, let's wash it out and try again. But generally with watercolor, you are fairly safe. There are interesting combinations that you can put together. And to get your darks, obviously, you have to have your yellow, your red, and your blue. So that does not mean blue, blue, and yellow, yellow, and red, red. You can use magenta as your red. You can use dioxazine as your blue. And you can use raw sienna as your yellow. And those are the colors that you can put together to make your dark color. So any kind of yellow, any kind of blue, any kind of red, together will give you your dark colors. Now, like I said earlier, these flowers take a lot of layering and a lot of wispiness, so you have to be patient. Don't try to do it all at once. You will lose dimension in the flowers if you get hasty. Or like me, if you get lazy and you want to get it over now, I've done enough, I'm done with this is over, then I would just use one brush stroke and finish. But if you really want to do something nice with it, if you really want to give a dimension, then please be patient and do it bit by bit. So adding your shadows to the stalks here, use your blues, the greens, and of course your dark mix that you've made. And like I said in the beginning, remember this is a loose painting, so nothing needs to be precise. If it looks a bit wonky, that's fine. Nothing in nature is really, really that precise. So use your discretion, use your imagination, and make your own cornflower bushel that you have there. Adding a bit of texture to the main flower there at the top. That's why there's these little dotted lines there. So when we're done with the painting, you will see the beautiful texture that it gives to that stalk. Again, adding some more layers, more dark to the flowers and to the base of the flowers. And then we are going to add a little bit more prominent corn stalks to the middle ground. And here again, you can use the raw sienna. You can use any of your colors again and make some dark colors there. Add that because again, nothing is just one uniform color. You need to have variation as much as possible. And don't use the same brush strokes all the time. Use the tip, use the broad side of the brush. You can even use a larger brush and make some dry brush strokes, which you will see a little bit later on as well. that wispy white cloud that we have there on the right-hand side is a beautiful background for the darker stalks that Heinrich is painting in there. So again, it makes them stand out. So here we are using a bigger brush and also a silver black velvet, and he's going to use that to make some dry brush strokes, and this gives you a different texture in your foreground, and it will help to just give it a little bit more dimension. So now you can let it dry again. Remember, watercolor takes patience, okay? And then here we have the fantastic Rosemary and Company Eradicator brush. This brush is fairly wide, and it is so soft, and it is beautiful to use to lift out some paint. Now, what is interesting here is that when we added the water, when we did the sky, the paint didn't move. But with the Eradicator brush, if you wet it and then lightly brush over your painting, you can see it actually lifts the phthalo blue out. And it gives you the highlights that you need. Now, with this brush specifically, you really don't need to rub. You can literally just lightly wipe on the paper. The brush will lift your paint there. Make sure that you rinse the brush every time, otherwise you might transfer paint to another area. And also, the moment that you've lifted, just dab out the excess water with a paper towel. So wherever you want to make lighter areas or lift out some paint, use the Eradicator and it will work magic in your painting. When you use the Eradicator, also be careful not to just make straight strokes. You know, use the side of the brush, use the tip of the brush, and make your strokes a bit rounded so that you can give your highlights a more natural look. Many times people would say, but why are you now taking all the paint out again? What was the point of putting the paint in the first place? Now you're taking it out again. There's always the need to have dimension in your elements. So you need to lift out some paint because it doesn't go right to the white. It just gives you that little bit of variation. And like here, we are using the Herend Eradicator. Now this one has got hog hair bristles, so it's a lot harder than the Rosemary. It's a lot stiffer. And as you can see, the hairs are fairly short. So with this one, you can actually scrub. Just be careful not to scrub too hard because you might damage the paper. But the effect is basically the same. So it lifts the paint. Look at it there. You can see it lifts the paint beautifully. And then the moment you dab it out, there you have your lighter areas. And those lighter areas are now going to be the basis on which we are going to add darker colors to give it dimension. So pay careful attention to where the darker colors are placed now, just next to the lighter color. And there you have a beautiful three-dimensional flower. The brush he's using now is a rigger. And again, this one has a long tip and very, very fine. So he worked from a thicker or a fairly thicker brush to one with a very, very fine tip. So your cornflower has really wispy little petals going. And then to add more light to your painting, You can, of course, use gouache if you want to. And this rigger works very, very nicely to add those wisps of gouache, to add the little bits of white to it. Now, with gouache, you have to be very careful in the sense that you might overdo it. So just be careful how much white you want to put in. In this case, he wanted to really make the lighter areas shine. So he's adding quite a lot of the gouache, and then he diffuses it like you see there with a little bit of water. So it starts darker and then it becomes almost gray. And you remember I said earlier, what's the point of adding the red if you are going to paint over it? But if you look at the petals, actually the buds now, you can see that little bit touch of red shining through with the gouache on top of it. And it just gives it life and dimension. And of course, you can mix the gouache with the other colors to give it a more opaque feeling, opaque look. And that again will give a different color and a different dimension to your elements. You can see already how the texture in the stalk at the top is coming together. If you compare that to the original picture, you would see that the texture is really, really very close to that. Here Heinrich mixed some of the gouache with the yellow, and that also, again, gives you that different shade that you need to give it a little bit more natural glow in your painting. To get some darker strokes, you can use the green and add a little bit of phthalo to it. If you want the strokes lighter, you add a little bit more water, or you can add more of the horizon blue or some of the yellow to it. And if you want to make it really light and more like a pastel color, then you can add some gouache to it. And there's another next layer of the magenta at the tip of the flowers, and already they have a lot more life. One would wonder, why in the world would you put blue stalks in the green stalks? The blue is just there to give you the shadow, the darker side of it. And if you look at it later on, it won't look blue anymore. It will just look like a darker shade of green. Here he uses the gouache to give a little bit more texture to the buds and to the bases of the flowers. So layer, 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 that's all you can do. The more layers you add, and of course you need to work lightly. Don't have a heavy hand. But the more layers you have and the more different shades of the blue and the purple and the green and so on that you use, the deeper your flower would be and the more dimension your flower would have. And then, of course, Heinrich loves to splatter. So he's added a bit more water to the gouache, and now he's splattering for the texture. If you are going to work with gouache and splatter, Be careful of your clothes and your surroundings because it's going to go everywhere. And that's it. It took a while, lots of layering, but that's a beautiful painting. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Thank you so much for watching. Vaya con Dios.